February 15th, 2023, meeting of the Lake Bluff Joint Plan Commission and Zoning Board of Appeals, regular meeting. They're called order, I guess. Agenda item number 1.
All right, Member Fisher?
Here.
Member Miller?
Here.
Member Russell?
Here.
Member Sorensen?
Here.
Member Toll and Member Danley are absent. Chair Peters?
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you. Agenda item number 2 is we address non-agenda items and visitors' public comment time. Unless we have somebody that's engaged via the internet, I don't believe we have any. Oh, is that? Okay.
Oh, I could have come by the internet? I didn't realize that was a choice. So this is kind of the last thing I would have expected being here tonight, because I'm doing a project for Candy and Bill Lang. They live at 355 West Sheridan Place. And we were moving along with the construction drawings, and I thought I better send these drawings over to Drew and just kind of see if we're meeting all the zoning codes. And we're actually well within the square footage limitations. We're going to be with the addition. It's a 300 square foot addition on the second floor. We're going to be about 3,000 square feet, and the allowable square footage on the site is about 4,200 square feet. The existing house is 24 feet high, and we're allowed 32 feet high, and the addition won't affect that at all. But George, your plane, we're interrupting that for a portion. Well, the existing house, which was built in the 1960s, is interrupting that plane by about 2 feet. It's about 24 feet long. And our addition is going to add to that, so we're going to be about 34 feet into the plane. But the slope of the addition, the roof slope, is very, very shallow. So let me just go through the photos with you. Do I have a clicker or some? Okay, so this is the front of the house. It's a 2-story home with a 2-car garage built in 1960 and the design was by an architectural firm called Lowenstein. It's interesting, there were only 3 sheets of drawings that were like 18 inches by 24 inches. They were the real blueprints. Candy still had the original blueprints. And that's what allowed the contractor to build the house. The building inspector turned over the last sheet and signed his name approving the drawings, a guy by the name of Joe Mohan or something like that. So that was the approval process in 1960. Plus the drawings were a reflected image of the actual house, so the carpenters built it sort of inside out, backwards. So the next shot. So that's the east side of the house, and in 2004, Candy, they built the first floor addition to expand the kitchen. You can see a little portion of that on the left-hand side. And the addition was designed to potentially take a second floor later on and expand, God bless you, expand the second floor master bedroom. So, yeah, and that gable end, the house is 7 foot off the east property line, and if you project the 12-foot line on the property line and the 45-degree angle, that gable clips into the daylight plane a little bit. So we go to the next slide. That's the addition, the first floor addition. It was a 10-foot expansion to the south, and it's about 30 feet long. So we're planning on building out over that first floor addition. So the next slide is the southwest corner. It gives you a little bit better angle of what's going on there. And the next slide is a slide of the rear of the house. And there was a garage addition built in 2001. So it took it from a 1-car garage to a 2-car garage. And on the left side, you can see where that addition took place. It's about 10.5 feet wide. So we go to the next slide here. I'll go through this pretty quickly. Actually, when I called up Candy today and told her we were going to have to probably go in front of the zoning board, she went out on the roof and took that picture, so you can kind of see what the neighbor next door has as far as windows, which there are none, basically. And Candy and Bill are good friends with them, so, depending on what we read here tonight from you, they'll probably support the addition. I'm hoping, So the next slide. So so again, I'm in the middle of the drawings, so not everything is labeled, but on the left side, you can see the site plan with the existing house and the first floor addition that was built in 2004 or 5. And we're building over that first floor addition, the circled area. On the right side is the existing floor plan. So there's a very small little bathroom off the existing master bath and a very small closet. Off the master bedroom. And the master bedroom is right now 16 by 11.3. And then there's a small hall bath off the hall, and then two additional bedrooms on the second floor. So that shaded area on the bottom is the addition that was put on in 2004, and we're gonna build we propose to build right over that area to expand the master bedroom and master bath. So we can go to the next slide, please. This is a little hard to read. And again, I didn't have a lot of time to prepare for this, but in we'll just go from left to right. The left side is the basement plan, and all those little circles are structural columns that will bring the loads down from the roof. And the first floor plan, that you can see that kitchen expansion and a study expansion and a powder room that was done 18 years ago. And we're going to be coming through some of those walls to take on the beams from the roof into the foundation system. And then the final plan on the right-hand side is the second floor. So we're going to, by expanding out to the south, we increase the size of the existing master bedroom. And then we can also put a walk-in closet where the old closet was for the master bedroom. And then the remaining portion of the expansion is a new master bath with tub, shower, toilet, double bowl sink. And then it also allows us to expand that hall bath a little bit and make it a little bit bigger and more usable. Before we go, that blue line is the beam. If we could just go back. So that blue line you see there is the structural beam. It's actually, and this is coming into play for the addition. It's actually going to be, the structural engineer has done a preliminary calculation, and it's 3 20-inch microlams that will take on the load of the roof, the existing roof, and the new roof in the expansion. And the columns will probably be paralam columns that will be engaged in the walls so that we can take the load down to the basement area. So that, if we go to the next slide, which are the elevations. Oh, this is the rear elevation. So that would be the window pattern of the second floor addition. The casement windows with awnings below are very mid-century modern, which is what the design of this home is. So we're trying to keep that flavor going there. Next slide. So as you can see, we're expanding out to the south. This is the east elevation. We're staying low with the roof. That roof pitch is about 212. We'll have a metal standing seam roof there to take on the elements. And we're not trying to make a big statement here. We're trying to keep it low key and the profile of the house low as well. So we go to the next slide. This is the west elevation, and the reason why I'm showing this for the construction drawings is to show the carpenter that there's a window there for the master bathroom, and how much siding and framing he has to do. But when we go to the daylight plane drawing, I'm also proving up that the garage does not have any penetration into the daylight plane. It's 8 foot off the property line. So we go to the next slide. This is a cross section through the building. That blue line is the existing second floor wall that would be removed. And then right above that blue line, there's the triple 20-inch microlams that will hold up the existing roof. The existing roof will be hung by hangers off of that beam, and then the new roof will be supported by the beam from below. And then you can see that 10-foot expansion on the second floor. The first floor is already there. So some of those other notes and things are showing the structural columns taking the load of that beam down into the foundation. So the one thing about that beam, see that beam is placed, if we can go back, yeah, the beam is placed, the bottom of the beam is flush with the second floor ceiling, and then it extends up. So in doing that, it creates a roof line in the new addition that protrudes through the building plane. We looked at some other options to not do that with a gable roof facing south, but that beam takes the loads all the way to the east wall. And if we put a gable roof on the back facing south, that beam would daylight into the air. It's hard to explain. A model would be better, but I think you get it, right?
So
You get
Frank,
it, don't you, George?
where is the daylight plane? Where's the daylight plane?
The next drawing is going to show that.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, okay, so the first drawing on the upper left is the rear elevation. So 7 foot out from the building is the property line on the right-hand side. And so I go up 12 foot. I think I'm following the rules of the daylight plane correctly. And then you take a 45-degree line off of that 12-foot marker, and you can see that we barely clip into the daylight plane with the gable roof, the existing gable roof of the house, and the new shed roof of the addition. And then if you go to the east elevation, that point where the 45-degree line hits the house, I have that red line shown. So that portion of the existing gable roof and the shed roof of the new addition, it's about 34 feet long. And I think we're allowed 20 to penetrate into the daylight plane. And then the lower drawing on the right side shows the daylight plane, and you can see the garage roof is well within that daylight plane. The daylight plane really should be placed on the west property line, but I thought this was a clearer way of showing it.
So Frank, just for clarity, would you mind if I pointed for everyone's benefit what I believe your variation need actually is? 'Cause
Yeah,
I'm not-
yeah, please.
I'm not quite sure, because
Yeah.
the drawings are so small.
Yeah, yeah.
and what made
Thank
you
you.
do all this together.
I always like it when clients take over my presentations too. It shows that,
I think the
They're involved.
area of the structure that he's gonna need to come in for to get a variation is actually just this little wedge right here, from the roof line
yep,
back to here and down. So that's it.
thank you, George.
Just so everybody understands
Thank you.
how de minimis it is.
So, that's it. I hope I didn't take up too much of your time, but Drew suggested I come in and maybe get a reading on how you feel about it and, whether we should move forward with this. Oh, these are some of the square footage calculations. So the lot size is 12,480 square feet. The first floor is 1,300 square feet. It's a small house by today's standards. The second floor is 767, so the total house existing is 2,089, and then the garage adds another 598 square feet, and there's a little shed in the back. I actually just estimated the shed size when Drew pointed it out he emailed me and told me it was on an aerial photograph. So I assumed that the shed was 10 by 10 because I had seen it several times, but I never measured it. But it's actually 6 by 7, so it's like 42 square feet. So the whole house, with the garage and shed is like 27, it's actually smaller, like 2750. And the proposed second floor addition is 300 square feet. The allowable area is 4,280. So we're almost 1,300 square feet below the allowable square footage. And then the existing house height at the ridge is 24 feet. We're not proposing to go higher than that with the shed roof. And the total height allowed by code is 32 feet. So, you know, I really try to stay within the parameters of zoning because, you know, this is a whole another step that I try to avoid, but we're here, you know, and Candy just can't wait to take a bath in that soaking tub. So I have a picture of her in the proposed tub at Studio 41, shopping around for him.
Eric, I wonder if you could show us the site on Google Earth, just so I can visualize it a little better, please.
Frank, can I just ask then what the height is while he's getting that? So what is that biggest part of the triangle, let's say, that we're crossing the daylight plane?
From,
From where it should be to where you actually, I mean, is that 2 feet? Is that,
24, the highest portion of it is 24 feet high, but I understand what you're saying, the sort of the vertical leg of the triangle. That's, hold on, I can tell you that. Let me just go.
It's gotta be something like 2.5
I was
feet.
gonna say, is it 2 or 3 feet? Yeah.
Can't be more than that.
Yeah, it's about 3 feet.
Okay.
It's about 3 feet.
And I will say, while we're looking for the aerial, in the past, the zoning board, over the years, has recognized that it is architecturally a problem and structurally a problem to make someone, when they're putting an addition on a house where there's an existing wall, to bump in that wall in order to comply with either a setback rule or the daylight plane rule. So,
Yeah,
I mean, in my view, and given how low the house is overall, you've got an existing condition to modify and jog that addition in the 3 feet to comply, that would be an unnecessary hardship.
And
So I would,
yeah.
given what you've presented, I would not have an issue with it.
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, appreciate that, Eric. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Tree kind of hides it.
Any other comments from the
Tree kinda
commissioners?
hides it. No, I think what George said makes sense, and I don't think there's gonna be a big, in my mind, a big discussion as to going forward with this.
Yeah, I agree. You know, it doesn't seem like it's that large a proportion.
Ann?
I agree. If the real issue is on the east side, and the house on the east side doesn't have windows there, you know, the landscaping can be adapted to shade, so that seems like it's a reasonable ask, for sure.
So, just take a scenario, so say the house on the east gets sold, and they wanna put windows on that side, can they come back and say, well, this shouldn't have been, well, it'll be approved by us, I assume it's a moot point, but they can't come back and say, well, this is approved, but we don't like the idea, and it's against code. They can't come back to the village and say they want it, okay.
So this would be compliant, if we grant a variation, it would be compliant with code. And that would be the end of it, and somebody moving in would know, you know, they're taking their property as is with no windows, and if they choose to build windows, that's their own choice. But there's no legal issue there.
Just curious. The house is about 18 feet The house on the east is about 18 feet from our house. And even with the sun at its lowest point, as we've had it over the last month, that sun is still going to come over the roof and hit that east wall, or the west wall of the home next door.
Okay.
And I know that because we have a similar situation at our house, and they put an addition on, and I was concerned about the sun coming into our sunroom, and it still does, even at the lowest, when the sun's at the lowest point. And it's about 18 feet away as well, maybe 20.
Okay.
Yeah, I think George's insights obviously are invaluable as always, and from the comments that you received, I think at least the five of us don't have any legitimate concerns, so.
Okay, good.
But appreciate your, presenting, so we had a better idea.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I mean, this timing worked out perfect.
Time worked out good.
Enjoy your bathtub.
Yeah, we'll have to do it.
This isn't about cosmetics, this is just about, senior years. Our bathroom is
Understood.
3 by 12. Just can't accommodate it.
Probably a lot of us in this room will face similar.
Yeah.
Strategically thinking.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you. All right. Agenda item number 3, consideration of the December 15, 2022 BCZBA regular meeting minutes. I trust everybody's had a chance to review. Any proposed changes or other revisions? Hearing none.
I just
Go
had
ahead.
one, sorry, on the bottom of page 2, right near the very bottom, the third line from the bottom, there was concern about cars almost backing up, and it says to
Oh,
East Sheridan Place, but it really should say Sheridan Road
That's true.
Okay,
instead of, you got that, Eric?
great, thank you, George. Any other proposed changes? Hearing none, is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries. Agenda item number 4, discussion regarding historic preservation zoning incentives. Eric, do you want to give us an overview?
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
So, during this workshop, there are pretty much two different topics that should be discussed by the PCZBA. The first is codifying zoning flexibility. The zoning regulations could explicitly recognize that historic homes typically require zoning relief for rehabilitation. These homes could be entitled to certain presumptions or more favorable treatment. Recently, at the November 28th Village Board meeting, they were not comfortable with the rebuttable presumption approach that the PCCBA had recommended to them. So alternative flexibility in granting relief is going to need to be looked at and discussed.
I have a question. What does that mean? Rebuttable presumption. What's the definition of that?
You wanna take-
So the language, and it's the document, if you look in your packet, the original language it's on the page, it's marked page 63, which is the original ordinance, and we're talking about that giant ordinance that we looked at for quite some time. But the idea was that if somebody had a protected feature, so a home or something on their property that's protected under our historic preservation ordinance, that they could come forward for a variation, and instead of the burden being against them, it would be presumed that if they're a protected feature, the request for a variation, they would meet the standards. And then whether it would be a neighbor or staff or this body would then say, well, if you find that, it's rebuttable, you could say, well, we really don't think you meet the standards. But the idea was it would give you a leg up if you chose to go through the landmarking process. So as Eric indicated, the board wasn't comfortable with that, so you'll see that we have a proposal for you in here. We have a draft ordinance, and that provision is now removed, and instead redrafted a new provision that takes away the language of this rebuttable presumption, but just states that when you consider the factors for a variation, that you will consider, to the extent applicable, the historic nature of the property.
Oh, it's this over here.
Yeah.
So it's not in stone. The rebuttal,
It's not automatic.
not automatic.
Right, and this is softer language, and so instead of, call it putting your thumb on the scale, as Drew explained to me earlier, use that term for it, it's just that when somebody comes forward under this newest draft, you should discuss the historical nature as you discuss your standards, if you think it's relevant. And I think it serves a couple functions, one of which is, it is a charge to this body to make sure that you are indeed discussing it and giving it the consideration that it's due. And then the second is part of its marketing. And if you remember the provisions that were put in originally, in part is to encourage people to come forward, to go through that landmarking process. It's a way to go to them and say, look, under our code, we care a lot about the historical nature of properties. And if you do this, under our code, you get certain benefits. One of which is we will consider and give appropriate consideration to the historical status if you happen to come forward with a variation.
Now I understand.
And the HPC is comfortable with the proposed revision?
They have not seen it yet.
Well, they have not? Okay. And you anticipate that the village board is comfortable?
State your name.
Yes.
and address.
Yes, as been pointed out, I think the board was uncomfortable with the idea that the village staff or you all or the village board would have to argue, the previous language, the first round of language was putting the village in a procedurally difficult position, an unusual position. And as opposed to putting your thumb on the scale, but standing on the scale. And so the idea, and there was a concern that they didn't want unintended consequences of somebody coming in saying, I want to add a hot tub to my original Lake Bluff camp meeting cottage because it's historically correct. And, so the idea that they didn't want to have unintended consequences by standing on the scale and be in a position to have to argue. And so the idea is, let's be thoughtful about it. Let's be careful and not necessarily, I don't say, be sure that the standards are addressed as part of a variation petition and that we just wouldn't have unintended consequences. I think that, yes, I think the board will be comfortable with this approach. And I think it achieves the goals of the HBC's Choose Lake Bluff platform because it is giving consideration to historical structures.
Yeah. And to put a fine point on it, also in the way that it's now been drafted, the very last part of the paragraph I think is important, which is provided that the historical nature of the protected feature is relevant to the application. So the idea being, if you just go, it'd be nice to have a hot tub, therefore I want to build into the setback, you could find, well, that's not relevant to the historical feature. If, on the other hand, they say, this is a historical structure, and we really want to keep the front facade or the side facade, because that's a historical part of it, which means we only can build into the setback, well, that may be relevant to the historical nature. How do we preserve it while allowing some flexibility? Then you would say, okay, we're going to consider that when we're talking about hardship and the other factors. So that applicability, I think, is a good add. But so that's what staff and I have worked on here, and hope, and if you have questions, and there are other ways to go about it if you don't like this either.
Yeah, Deb?
I just have kind of some questions to confirm. So my understanding is this ordinance that we're talking about only applies right now to the 23 houses that are on the first sheet of colorful streets?
Landmarks.
Those are the landmarks, right?
Yes.
Okay, and then potentially it could apply to the next sheet of ones that we would like to have landmarked. But that's kind of the universe for the,
Yes, and I'm glad you asked that question because the idea is, what is the exposure to the village of doing this? What are we really even talking about here? And that's where this list came into play with the board's conversation, trying to understand how big is that universe? And I think there was a comfort that we're not talking about an enormous list of properties.
so I guess one question that I have then is there a way that we could just call them landmark houses as opposed to historic? I'm just afraid that somebody's gonna see this and think, oh, I have a 75-year-old, big, beautiful home, do I get to apply for the bonuses? I mean, is there any reason not to refer to them as landmark? Or is this linked so tightly in the ordinance that I'm missing it?
Yeah, so the language is protected feature designated pursuant to the village's historic preservation regulations as codified in Title IX, Chapter 14 of this code. And so throughout the chapter on historic properties, it uses the words protected feature, which could be a building, it could be a piece of landscaping or other structure, depending on what the item is. And so that's a defined term already in our code. So if we use the term landmark, it does not accomplish the same thing, and we would, without rewriting that whole chapter, we wanted to pick up that defined term.
Ben, you confused me a little bit, I'm sorry. In order to become a protected feature, it does have to be landmarked.
Right, but the protected feature is the piece of the landmark that's protected.
Right.
Yeah,
it
but
is-
that's the defined, so it's picking up the right defined term. And let me pull up the chapter here.
I guess if I'm just saying that if indeed it only links, it's only applicable to these houses, is there some way that we can tie this so that somebody looking at this can say, okay, I'm not on that list, so I can't apply for, more easily?
You need to be landmarked to have the tool available to you.
Right, so I would just love a way to say
So,
that.
yeah, well, I think that's part of the conversation, right? When somebody comes forward with a property and they say, oh, we'd love to do this. Oh, well, if you were landmarked, you could do this. And I think that's part of the incentivization process.
Okay,
Okay.
so I guess I sat through probably too many of those, so they've all jumbled together in my head for the
Okay.
HPC as it went through the iterations. So you're saying that if somebody comes whose property is not on this additional list, they could still ask to be landmarked?
Yes.
Okay, that's not the way I understood it, but okay.
That list was the list that the HPC came up with saying this, the board had asked for, give us a list of homes that you think should be landmarked that aren't already. And that's what that list represents. That's not to say 75 years from now, there's a different list, or 10 years from now, right? There could be some other properties that are built that for some reason satisfy the historic preservation standards that would qualify that the board would want to landmark that property. So it's not intended to be an all-inclusive list, but it was at the moment that we're talking about right now in the village, these are the properties that the HPC would like to see landmarked.
Okay.
Okay, well, I mentioned this to you, Drew.
Yeah.
My fear is that if we create a 20% bonus, that others may use the landmarking process to literally buy in, if you will. They still would have to get approved. Get landmarked and then, oh, gee, I can build 20% more on my home than my neighbor can on the same size lot. And that number still scares me. And I just want to clarify for everybody at the very beginning of this memo here, the very first sentence in number 1 talks about recognizing that historic homes, which generally you just mean older homes. That's what so older homes in the village typically require zoning relief for rehabilitation. Well, just to be clear with everyone, I think that was a misuse of the word, because anyone in the village right now, your home can be 150% over what's allowed. If you have an old non-conforming structure and it violates 7 different zoning regulations, setback, height, the whole schmash, and there are a couple of them that are pretty big, they are still allowed by code. Our code still allows somebody to completely rehabilitate their home. Doesn't allow them to enlarge it any further, but they can completely strip down all 4 walls. They can literally take out 49% of the structural supports and replace them, and that's allowed. So just so
now.
everybody understands that, it jumped right out at me that, whoa, this isn't right. Anyone can still take care of their older home as it exists today without having to come to the ZBA for approval. So it's the next step of, and what worries me is if you look at these two lists right now, between the two lists, the ones that are already landmarked and the ones that the HPC feels are good candidates for landmarking, 32 out of the 46 homes on the list are currently underneath what's allowed. So 32 of the homes can still put additions on. And if you average the numbers and throw out the outliers on the really huge lots, you know, most of them could probably still add about a 20% addition on their home. So if we then put on another 20% on top of that, you've got someone coming forward on average with a 40% addition to their existing home that they're going to argue is a landmarked home. And when you put in my mind, when you put a 40% change in volume on your house, you're significantly changing that home. And I just think it's too, in my opinion, it's too big a carrot. I want to protect the older homes, but I think, and I think the message, what was the message from the board that we don't, this got kicked back to us because they're worried about unintended consequences. And I think by creating too big a bonus, the unintended consequence is going to be that people that can afford it, that can hire the architects, can develop the very fancy presentations, and they're literally, in some cases, going to buy their way into the right to have a home that's 20% more than their neighbors are allowed. And 20% is a pretty significant number. If you go down East Center Avenue, I did a quick calculation here. It's, you know, most people will be able, 20% is 860 square feet more.
Now, I have a
And a lot of them are under, right now are under by at least, so you're talking about suddenly putting 1,700 square feet on a house, and that's changing the whole character of the house, except maybe the front facade. So I just think the 20% number scares me for those reasons, and I think maybe a 10% carrot would be a more reasonable number to try to induce people to save their homes without getting into problems.
Can I just ask, of the people who tend to rehabilitate some of these older homes, do you typically see them doing it by doing the third floor? I mean, a lot of these, in driving past them, you know, were built before we had height restrictions, et cetera. They do have big third floors, whether they have true stairs going up or the ability to make a stair or something. You know, I could see that some would say, yeah, I want to expand my living space, but I want to do it by using that third floor as opposed to necessarily bumping out. Do you see that much, or is that not used much?
I would put, and George, help me out here with your years of experience. It seems to me I would put it under the umbrella of modernization. You know, does that mean bigger masters, baths, or,
Okay.
or, you know, the idea and
Mudroom and stuff.
closets. I mean, you've seen some of that recently, the North Avenue, when they were looking for a walk-in closet that didn't have a 4-foot ceiling height. Or,
Right.
you know, so finding spaces that are functional in today's living.
So you're seeing more push outs essentially, or,
It seems to come in all shapes and sizes. But to your point, yes, there's been other homes that were built pre-limitation and that the third floor, you know, the attic space is potentially functional. And so they try to take advantage of that and pop on some dormers and, you know, take advantage of that extra space. So it's been that, it's been the bump outs, but it's modernization.
right, okay.
And the one other point, I'm sorry, that I wanted to make, and then I'll be quiet. Keep in mind that anyone can come in and apply for a variation anyway. The village can change the code and allow for 20% more for all these older lots, and someone can come up with a plan and say, oh, I want 22% more. They would have the right to come here and ask for that, just like they have a right now. The zoning board historically has granted lots of FAR variations for more than 10%.
True.
If it's done reasonably. And I think that's how we all would view it. If it doesn't impact the neighbor, if it doesn't create a really high wall right next to your neighboring property, or they're not asking for a 50% FAR variation, typically because they're working with an older home, my opinion is the zoning board historically has approved if it's a rational ask. And so once again, for that reason also, if you set the bar here, there's always people that are gonna want it a little higher. And to bump this bar up by 20% on these small lots, to me, that's a lot. And once it's on the books, the house can come in, we won't even see it, staff can't stop it. It's gonna happen. There won't be a backyard, the village is talking about stormwater, and now you're talking about allowing houses that are 20% larger. There's a lot of old homes in this village. So, anyway, that's it, I've said my piece.
Well, George, before we talk further on that 20% proposal, are we in agreement with respect to the proposed subparagraph H? And then we'll get into the 20% issue.
What page is that on?
Page 4 of the proposed revision. First, third, Elliot? Yeah,
Page, okay, yeah. That's what we're talking about.
and then we can talk further about the,
So it's a draft
percentage.
ordinance, and in H, you will see the double underlined bolded language. And that's
That's a change. That would-
That's the change. So the section that we originally had talked about, with the presumption, that's gone. And then this would be the new provision relating to the historic properties.
And I think this is reasonable and gets rid of that presumption. So I have no problems with changing the language.
Good, thank you, Elliot.
I'm in favor of this. I think the bump back from the village board was reasonable, and we had a lot of conversation back and forth about 5%, 20%. We were really playing with those numbers, and I think the unintended consequences are a potential issue. So I am fully endorse this.
Yep. George, you're on board with subparagraph H. So I think there's a consensus that we're agreeable to that proposed revision. Now we should get into the 20% factor and work our way through that further.
If I may, just a little background, the memo talks about the Winnetka example as something to walk through, just a little history on that. That's only been on the books in Winnetka for about a year. They've had nobody to take advantage of that yet. As part of a larger incentive package, I was exchanging voicemails with the CD director there, and he didn't expect a lot of use out of it, honestly. And, this is the idea of carrots versus sticks in preservation. There's not a big, a lot of communities doing that, so there's not a lot of other examples to share with. So to Member Russell's concern, the idea of putting something on the books, some line in the sand to start the conversation, to be responsive to the preservation incentive package, at the same time, knowing that it's likely you're gonna be codifying the flexibility for preservation efforts for floor area or for other variations moving forward, so you'll have at least some place to start, right? The idea. So I don't know if finding the perfect number or just a number and erring on the side of conservative, to George's point, I think that would be okay. So I think that would be satisfying to the HBC as well as the boards overall. Let's be careful and have a starting place and come back and revisit it. And we had a conversation before the meeting talking about the village's desire to manage bulk years ago, and also trying to control or facilitate certain design elements when the board gave certain bonuses for porches and detached garages. Well, that also increased bulk, right? So there was pluses and minuses with that. So the idea of just dipping your toe in the water, I think, is okay. And just watching it over time and coming back and checking in and say, how much is this being utilized? Is it at all? So.
I think our biggest concern is on the small lots, obviously on the east side of the village. And maybe the terminology should be up to a certain number rather than the certain number. So it gives us more leeway to decide if it's appropriate for that particular lot.
That's like Winnetkins, right? Up to 20%.
I think the wording is important. I'm not sure 20% is the right number, maybe it should be 10% or 15%, but I don't think it should be a blanket number.
How would the, if we went down the cap route, how would that work? So if you had a house on a 7,500 square foot lot and they were already maxed out, we would, if we had a cap of 250 square feet, would that still provide a little latitude for the HPC and for this type of homeowner?
Again, I think it's a line in the sand that can get re-examined. I mean, they still have the ability to go through floor area relief. I mean, there's all kinds of tools available, but it is an incentive to say, hey, here's a new carrot to incentivize. And you could see a certain petition will look to you like, that makes sense, go beyond, go 600 square feet. And others you'll look at and say, we're not interested in giving one. I'm sure, I mean, that's just, it's gonna be that way.
I know we had a conversation at one point about, or I think we did for sliding scale a little bit, you know, is, George, when you were looking at the different addresses and such, I mean, does that make any sense for the bigger lots? You know, to kind of pull out the bigger lots and say these could be potentially up to 15% or, you know, something.
In my mind, yes, the bigger lots should be allowed more because our code actually is more severe in controlling homes on, the larger the lot gets.
Punitive
Once,
there.
you know, everybody starts with getting 40% of their lot size, and then up to 9,000 square feet, so you can build 40% as a 3,600 square foot home. But then the next 9,000 square feet of lot size, you're only allowed 20% additional. So then you can put, but then anything above that, which is still less than a half acre, and there's a lot of properties that are more than a half acre, they're only allowed 10%. So our regulations are actually, for better or for worse, they're more rigid on the largest lots in the village.
Right.
So,
I mean, I'd certainly be open to saying, you know, if there's a way to pull that out and say, but for lots, you know, country estates, or I don't know how you'd want to just define it, just something bigger, then it would be a bigger number. If that doesn't make it more cumbersome.
You could always entertain a text amendment when somebody comes through, you know, there's different ways to do it.
well, staff can come up with the sliding scale, right?
Sure.
Started 10% on the 7,500 square foot lots is 300 square feet, because they're allowed 3,000. So, Gary, you had thrown out, or somebody threw out 250 square feet for
Yeah,
the
just an arbitrary
7,500.
number.
That's very close, that's 8%, so 300 square feet on the 7,500 is a 10% allowance, extra allowance. And then,
Are we better going zoning classification by classification, or are we better off just with a percentage that we feel?
I think lot size, because we have anomalies in town where we have very small lots in estate districts, but we also have some very large lots in the R4 district.
That's true.
Where people own 6 or 7 historic underlying lots, and that would really convolute the, I think you always have to go by lot size and not the district, in my opinion.
I mean, the idea of, like, the Winnetka model is saying up to 20% without a cap, the idea of you have to argue for every square foot, right? The idea, is that,
No, but we're talking about a proposal that would allow, what's presented on paper to us was a suggestion that we allow the 20% for the landmarked homes. That's the way the Winnetka,
well, I think you have to
really-
argue for it's up to a maximum of 20%, the way I read it. Is that it's not, there's no guarantee you're gonna get any more than 1% or 2%. Is that the way you read it, Ben? So the idea is that so that way, but as from a practicing architect, that may be difficult, because who's gonna determine if 5%, what's the right argument, right? You know, it's very difficult.
Rob could talk us into 50% of one of his projects.
So
But can I just say something? Just, you know, I mean, I sympathize with what you're working with here, because, you know, zoning is about numbers, and that is very left-brained, rational. This is the rules, these are the boundaries, this is what you gotta work with. I think the whole intent, I believe with historic preservation, which actually I was on the very first group as they were forming it up, and it's about coming to the zoning board with the peripheral vision of this is a historic structure and have a little more latitude to think about how this proposal is being considered. I mean, I remember, you know, 2001, when I was at 134 East Center and we did an addition on the house, and the first floor plate sits 5 feet above the finished grade, so 20% of the basement got calculated into the bulk. And, you know, I was told bulk is bulk, and it was black and white. And I remember saying then that, well, okay, I guess we could tear it down and build the ugliest thing we could imagine. And suddenly it all kind of started softening up a little bit, and the house was completed. But I think that's what occurred then, and that was before even HBC even existed. But it was about having some latitude in the thinking. Now, the numbers are tricky. I think George is onto something about as far as correlating whatever percentage it is to the lot size, and it's kind of scales from there, because that's how the zoning really works, is about lot size. That's your first starting point on anything with any property. So if it's a 7,500 square foot lot or a 12,000 square foot lot, you know, it probably should be reflecting that in some sort of a sliding form that I think was being suggested. But it's, I think it's about peripheral vision. That's how I look at it, because there's also ways of doing a project that can disguise the bulk of a building too, or an addition. Or you can be really in people's face with it, and, you know, so I think but that's a subjective side, which makes it challenging. But I think what we're trying to do is get some sort of a merger going on here between the rules of the road with zoning and the empathy maybe toward a historic building and a building that's trying to be modernized to the point where it's actually meets today's living standards. So, but I know but the numbers are tricky when we're getting into this. So I think maybe the sliding approach is and making it a cap, because you can still grant variances, or even if it's a big one, it goes to the village for their final say, the village board. But I think what the public needs to see is what are the rules of the road, and how do we go down this path and not find ourselves in an accident. So, my thoughts.
No, thank you very much.
So Drew, once again, because I'm totally confused, because I read the Winnetka ordinance that they will automatically qualify for a one-time maximum building size bonus of 20%. I thought the suggestion that you brought us tonight was to literally, if a home is landmarked, that their FAR would be 20% over whatever the existing rule was for that lot size.
Well, I read this as it was up to 20%. That's the absolute max, one time. But you could come in and argue up for a 10 or 4%, depending on your needs.
It still allows an applicant to argue for 22. You can still come in for a variation.
Right, I understand. That's the way I understood it, and I was trying to think of a way that you could write language in the code to at least caution people to say, obviously, the village is going to be concerned with giving greater bonuses on smaller lots in denser neighborhoods, and just say that is we can add that as a consideration point to make that crystal clear. Where, you know, just put that out there.
Because I'm certain when Paul from the HPC was in here in November in our joint seminar, he was absolutely making the point, their recommendation was people don't want to have to question whether they can go through this process with the with the zoning board and get their approval. They want to know. And people are more, and I agree with that concept, people are more apt to make the decision to save an older home and design an addition if they know they can get that extra 10% up front. And I truly thought that's what we were.
No, I think they
we were
did pitch
talking
that.
about.
I think they did pitch that, the idea of like, yeah, 2,000 square feet bonus. Yeah, you know,
Otherwise, I don't even know why we're having the conversation, just let
Yeah.
people, then it's just a number floating in the code, but you still gotta apply for, and make the argument,
but even if reading it the way you're describing, even then you still have to argue for it, right? There's still a process.
The way I read that Winnetka,
Yeah,
Ben, you don't represent Winnetka, do you?
I do.
How do you read that then?
So, looking back at this, I do think it's automatic.
Yeah.
So,
Winnetka?
but you can do it any way you want, and I guess, it's a big picture, big picture. The biggest problem always is going for a variation. Anybody can come in anytime and say, I want to build bigger. But the point of a variation, and you look at your factors that you have, and there's many you have to meet, the biggest one, though, is, I would say, the hardest to meet is hardship. I want a walk-in closet that's bigger. What's the hardship? A lot of people have a regular closet. I want his and hers each have their own bathroom. That's not a hardship, right? And so simply saying, I want bigger, and it doesn't anger a neighbor, so therefore give me bigger, is not technically meeting the standards. So the idea, I think, is, okay, so somebody can always do that, but let's give an incentive to people who want to come in and go through the historical landmark process. So you can do it with a bonus, is one of those, and you have kind of two different options, one of which is an automatic grant up to a certain size of whatever you think is appropriate. You can also do it where you can come in and ask, but relax the standard and have a different standard than hardship or something, or because that's not under Illinois zoning law, you always have a right to ask for a variation if you meet that standard. So balancing it, if the goal is the incentive, I think the question is really getting rid of the variation standard and either doing it automatically, just you come to staff and say, here's my plans, I qualify, thank you. Or do you want a review process? And if so, let's say they come before this body, what are you evaluating? Those, I think, procedurally are your two options. And then the cap issue is the other, which is regardless of which path you choose, what's the right number? Is it 10%? Is it 20%? Is it up to 20%, but no more than 500 square feet? Does it matter if it's a big lot or small lot? There's ways to go about it. But I think that conceptually, that's how this lays out. So Winnetka, looking at this, they've done it with the automatic qualifying for a one-time. And so I think if I remember correctly with the Winnetka model was if you came in and said, okay, I want to build this bathroom, and you only go up, you get the bonus, but you only use 1% of it, you can't come back another time and say, I still have 19% left. The idea is one time you get to come in, you can do it. So that's the Winnetka model.
Well, and I think the thing to keep in mind too, as we try to figure out which direction, we are trying to incentivize keeping the bigger, keeping all of the older houses, but especially keeping the bigger older houses on more land. So I think being more flexible with them, because the alternative is, if it's easier to tear it down, well, then we potentially lose that house. So I think if we say up front, okay, if you're on a lot size of X, assume that you can have up to, X amount. But just to clarify for me, so it's, for all of this, they still need to come before. We're not talking about an automatic grant here, regardless of what Winnetka is. It's not by right. People still need to come to the PCZBA to do it?
No, we can do whatever we want. It's up
Right,
in the
I
air.
understand, but I mean, the way it's been remanded back to us or so.
Right.
You know, it's because they were having trouble with it just being an automatic.
That was the first provision that dealt with how the standards are considered when hearing petitions for relief from other sections of the code. It can be any bulk. This, as I understand, the conversation is focused on now a one-time or a bonus granted to landmark properties. And we're only talking floor area, as I understand from all the bulk provisions. It's not a setback, it's not, and I guess I was reading that again, and the clarity of the Winnetka model, but that it would be up to, and I guess I was reading it differently in terms of it was a maximum of 20%. Somebody could have come in and asked for it, but yes, I think we're talking about an automatic bonus.
Okay.
Long answer, but that's yes.
I know that you addressed this in a way. Are there other incentives aside from a one-time bonus?
Yeah.
You're asking financial and everything, yeah, there's all kinds of
Right.
incentives that have been.
Waiver of building permit fees, property tax rebates
Right.
have been approved.
Right, so how much do we want to specify here as opposed to using all the levers? Or is this just another lever that we're gonna add into the argument?
This
right?
is another incentive that the Preservation Commission had pitched to the board, and the board wanted the ZBA's feedback on it.
Yeah.
And I do think that the building scale is important because, as you were saying, it's the lack of a mudroom, it's the lack of some livability feature that, so what if you're gonna give me a property tax, bonus or, I'd really rather, if I can't have a mudroom and I can't have a laundry room on the first floor, it's just not livable for day-to-day life, those kind of arguments.
Right,
So I
right.
think it does need to include this kind of, however we attach it.
Incentive, yeah, as part of the
Yeah.
package.
Right.
Yep. So Winnetka has done this, and there aren't a lot of other examples out there.
That is correct. When, Hinsdale did not do this, right?
Yeah, I looked at Hinsdale's. I can't remember specifically what it was, but they did not enact a floor area.
Hinsdale is tearing down everything they can see and building new. That's their philosophy.
Okay.
Yeah, I can see, I go there every week, so everything's being,
There's a lot of tear downs, yeah.
Okay.
including my daughter.
Including what?
My daughter.
Oh.
She's tiny. So, I personally can't see a blanket number. I think I like the wording up to a number. I think that protects everybody and gives the right to the owner. I also feel they should have a caveat that they come before us as a workshop before they get involved with any of the costs involved with updating their house, before they have to come before us officially. So let us give them some feedback if this is something that's doable. I think that's, to me, in my mind, that's a nice compromise.
Is 10% a reasonable?
That doesn't matter. If they're gonna come to us ahead of time, I think the number's moot right now.
But I think if we have 10% or 12% or whatever it is, at least they know.
Yeah, they have a ballpark,
Yeah, ballpark.
but I don't know who decides on 10 versus 20.
Yeah, I think what I'm looking at is what could be the adverse impact on the neighbors.
Yeah, I think our biggest problem is, the smaller houses.
Right.
In the east side. I don't know. I don't know if there's a right answer, personally. It's our own personal preferences. That's what it comes down to. There's no guidelines. There's no law, so.
Well, I would urge you to think about, if you wanted to come before you, what guidelines would you use? Because,
Right.
Wouldn't it be proportion, no?
well,
Proportion to
that's, okay, but so we need some sort of guideline to apply, right? Because if somebody comes in and you just go, feels like you get 2%, and the next person comes in, feels like an 8%, and there's no
Right.
objective criteria, we're asking for a fight, and it probably, it probably would not hold up. Now,
You think up to is not a good terminology?
up to, provided that there's some standard that you all would apply objectively when you determine when somebody gets 20 and one gets 10 and one gets 1. I think you need something to look at. So think about that as if you want people to come forward, what are you going to measure? And, if you're talking about the size of the lot, again, a sliding scale, that does have the benefit of here's an objective number based on a reasonable thing. But I don't know that it should be a percentage of the existing house. So if I happen to have on a giant lot, a really small house, and 10% happens to be, 150 square feet, and you happen to have a bigger house on the same size lot, and you get 10% and you get 400, that seems rather arbitrary.
Yeah, it's gotta be lot size.
It's lot, yeah.
But Elliot, thinking about for a minute, I was thinking, yeah, Elliot, that's a good idea, but what concern, I don't want the zoning board to get in the position of deciding ahead of time whether or not a home is a candidate for landmarking. That's not our, but that's the way the whole structure's been. In order to get the bonus, it's gonna have to be a landmarked home
It
eventually.
has to be landmarked before they come before us.
Right, so they're still doing, then you're making it a pretty significant, are we really giving them any incentive at all? Because then they gotta go and have their house landmarked and then come to the
Isn't that what they have
PCZBA
to do now?
to get a,
And isn't that what that's
no,
gonna
but
happen?
but you're, for the subjective review as opposed to the automatic bonus, whatever that would be.
So you're in favor of like an automatic? no matter-
Yes,
what
but
you're
a
saying?
low number, not the 20%. It's just too much for, as I said, going down Center Avenue and
But how do you
saying
choose a
everybody, you
number?
can have an extra 1,000 square feet, that's a lot of house.
Yeah, but how do you fairly choose a number when
Well,
there's all different sized? So again, maybe it's proportional to the size of the lot, as we just said. And that's a number that somebody has to figure out, not us.
Could we say, just for talking purposes, could we say that it's 10% up to a certain size, and that it could be up to a maximum of 10% for a certain size lot, and it could be up to a maximum of 20% for lots above X? Is that anything helpful?
I think
That could be, it does have to be, as we're talking through this, it's gotta be based on lot size. And the point that there might be a smaller home, and then we say up to 20%, but then there's a larger home a few doors away that it wants to also go up to 20%, but the same lot size, that is truly not fair. And yes, it could be dressed up differently, but it's still a
But
problem.
realistically, if they were a small house on a big lot, they could just come and do an expansion. I mean, they could come
That's
and
true.
Yeah,
request.
Yeah.
Per this table,
Yeah,
most of these homes are
They're
gonna
under.
need this gift anyway.
right,
They might grab the financial incentives that have already been passed.
right.
But there's a lot of homes that are way under.
Absolutely. I mean,
Especially
there's
the
only-
very, very large lots, the
Right.
27, 30%, 21%, they're not even getting close to their allowable.
Right, I mean, 8 on the first one needs square footage out of 23, and I think 6 on the second list. So it's a small number that wouldn't get a pretty good-sized expansion without ever having to come before us and ask for anything. Right? Am I missing something?
So then you're saying up to 10% in the R4 district, but then there's a large homes in the R4.
I think we were saying it has to be based on lot size because of the mix of lots.
Because this is a bonus over what you already could do on your lot.
So as I see, if you have a 7,500 square foot lot, it's maxed out, that's 3,000 square feet. If we're at 10%, that's another 300 square feet.
Get you a money.
300 square feet, though, can have a great impact on your neighbor, depending on how it all plays out. So, I mean, I'm more inclined to think 10% for the smaller lots, but I'm not sure where you draw the line as the square footage.
Yeah.
To that concern, and I don't know if this is enough, Mr. Chairman, but the Winnetka language says, nothing into this subsection A, which is referring to the bonus, shall be interpreted to exempt, vary, or waive any other lot, space, bulk, or yard regulations, or any other requirement for any relief from such regulations that are otherwise applicable to the property and the use of the maximum building size bonus. So the idea is you can't go into the setback. You can't go, so the idea is you get it, but it can only go in the building envelope.
Boy, okay.
Okay.
Well, that simplifies it a little bit, a lot, actually. Good language.
George, what are you thinking?
Well, personally, I think 10% is the cap for me, but at some point, I agree with the premise that for these larger lots, we should allow more, but I'm looking at these lists and trying to remember the houses, and I don't know where that number is. Because even at 18,000, like the house down on Center Avenue, the one that's 104% right now, that's a 27,000 square foot lot. There's a 6,400 or 6,600 square foot home. Would we really want 20% more on top of that? That's even at 27,000 square foot lot. That's a huge, that's a huge addition to that home. So I think that Deb, in response to your original suggestion, I think that to work up to 20%, that has to be way out there on the lot size scale for people in the 1 acre and.
Well, yeah.
Country
I would say
estate.
1 acre.
Right. the
Right,
country
1
estate,
acre, which is all of that bath and tennis area.
Which never get to the max anyway.
Which, right.
Right. So chances are they're not even gonna need to go for a bonus, and just, I think we need to clearly identify that this is a bonus in addition to the normal bulk that you're allowed on your particular property within, as you were saying, within your own setbacks and, all the normal things still apply.
I guess I'm more inclined toward starting out like with 10% and see where it goes. And if we're getting resistance from the HPC or we're getting resistance from individual homeowners saying, hey, I can't work with it, then
They have to come here anyway.
we might have to
Yeah.
critically address. But
Yeah, if somebody's got a
20%
special
seems
case,
pretty aggressive.
it gets pretty large. And as you look down this list, everybody's got, the vast majority of the bigger lot owners have tons to work with anyway.
Right,
Right.
that's
Why-
true.
Why give them,
Okay, I mean, I
just
can
to
live
keep
with that.
that one.
And I'd be curious, 20 years from now, if this is created, at the end of the day, even with a bonus, are they seeking relief for setback or something else anyway? Are they coming to you guys regardless?
Well, I can live with that, if you think 10% is the number to try for now and stuff, and,
Well, it just seems to be a reasonable
I mean,
compromise.
I'm saying I don't need to have a second number, inserted for the bigger things.
Right. I don't know, any further discussion among the commissioners, or any concerns from the village's perspective? Drew? Or Ben?
I was just trying to see if there was another secondary tier of bonus available, and what would it take to, what conditions would be necessary to say, okay, now you get to this last 10%?
You've been hanging around the HPC for long.
I'm just throwing it out there. I just,
I mean,
what would that look like? It'd have to be special, right?
So let them apply for the variation, if it's that special.
I mean, the other way to look at it is less about percentage and just square footage, right?
Yeah.
If the idea was, we want people to be able to add a mudroom or a family room that they couldn't otherwise fit, or an extra bedroom, think about a room size and say, if a bedroom, I don't know, is 300 square feet, you get 300 square feet. But the idea is it's not a percentage. I mean, that's the other way to do it. which has implications too, because for a really, really small lot, it's a bigger percentage, and a really big lot, and maybe it's not enough of an incentive to have somebody go through landmarking because they say, oh, I could care, the mudroom is not the reason I'm gonna keep or demolish the house.
Right.
You know, so I don't know if that gets you any closer, but that's the other way, is get away from percentage, look at square footage.
To me, the most fragile situation are the heritage lots, you know, those original little cottage lots, and like on East Prospect. How does this mesh with those?
Right. But are you still within building pad?
You have to be, right?
Right.
So
So
chances
I
are
think-
somebody's gonna come here, they're gonna have to get other relief,
Right.
right?
So I mean, I think that based on that, we could simply say, no, you know, even 300, you know, or whatever, is too much if you've already maxed out because you're bumping up against side setbacks, front back setback.
Yeah, well, right.
Daylight play.
They won't be able to get it anyway. The 10 heritage lots, the ones that are on the 50, 20-foot wide lots,
They can't
they're
do
not
much.
gonna be able to do it
Yeah.
anyway, because they'll have too many
Right. So
violations.
it's more the 50 by
So they'll have to come here
125s.
anyway for
Yeah.
variations.
Okay.
Something about the percentage seems to work better to me, Gary, because it slides along with the lot size directly as opposed to a fixed 300 square feet or something, because then it's.
Well, what if we were,
Conceptually makes more sense to me, but that's just,
does it go
Which
back
does.
to HPC after us?
the percentage of what, if it's 10%, but applies to every, you know, every entity, so to speak.
But if they're allowed, on a bigger lot, or any lot, they're allowed to expand anyway before that 10%.
Right.
So
It's
becomes
almost
a moot
Then
point.
it becomes moot.
I think when we've looked at bulk in the past, you know, I think the critical lot sizes were, I don't know, 15,000 or below. I know we did an analysis several years ago, and, you know, above that, there's just so much more latitude, or maybe it's 18,000, I'm not sure. Rob, any further questions or recommendations from your perspective?
Well, we're focused on square footage, and I'm thinking more than likely, any of these possible projects are gonna be also looking for, you know, side yard variances. And I mean, that's gonna be a part of the package of whatever comes forward on most of these smaller lots. You know, square feet are square feet, but where do you put it? And you may need to get a variance on the side yard setback. And that, so it's a matter of just, I mean, people are gonna come in front of you no matter what. And I think the idea was to try to get more of the community to buy into the historic landmarking and then try to protect these homes. I don't know, I think we're getting kind of caught up on the square footage thing. I think it's gonna be more about setbacks that are gonna be happening no matter what. And then it's gonna be a matter of this, then, that immediate context, and what is the adjacent properties looking like, and, you know, the negative space between buildings, does it fit together or not? And it's gonna be on a case-by-case basis at that point. So, but we do wanna encourage people to landmark their homes to protect them. So I think the percentage, I wouldn't get caught up in square footage. I think the percentage, and maybe it's a 10%, whatever you choose to do, but that might be the carrot that might draw people in and to engage the process and really see if this is something they really want to do. So I think that's what you're trying to do, is create a carrot.
Right.
And so, but you're gonna get setback variance requests too, go along with this. I mean, that's a given on these tiny lots that we have. So, that's my own thought.
No.
That's the next workshop, right? The heritage lots, going back and revisiting the village's code, how that, when you own, if you own a property that's contiguous to one of those smaller lots, and you own both, that you render that old heritage lots no longer buildable, so they disappear from the landscape. So that's happening. I mean, that's always struck me as one of the most unique things about Lake Bluff, that those small little lots and those cottages, that, you know, the variety of housing stock and that streetscape, how it presents, and that is so linked to the village's history. I think that's one of those things that needs to get visited sooner or rather than later.
You've got nothing to do this month, so
I've
with Glenn gone.
got nothing going on. Mike on, yeah.
So are we recommending, is that what we're doing?
I think we
You'll see it.
anybody.
Yep, we have to hold a public hearing.
Okay, but our thoughts are gonna go back to the village board, or?
I can bounce it and say, this is where the PCCBA's head's at, sure, and they'll say, go for it, and you guys roll your public hearings, and
Okay, I mean, if we wanna have a I would say 10%, up to 10%, just leave it at that. You know, not nitpick anything further than that
in the building envelope.
in the building envelope.
And is it a one-time bonus, like Winnetka?
Sounded like it. That's what I heard.
Okay.
Yeah,
That's much easier to administer than
for sure.
cherry picking.
Okay.
And you're on board,
Yes.
George?
It's in perpetuity, right? With the landmarking of the home then.
Right.
They get to use it one time and.
One and done.
That's the additional 10%, the certified landmark. Is that, you know, that's the one where the village can control whether it comes down or not. Is that the lever you want to pull for the additional up to 20% for those? You can think about it.
Right.
You're right.
But that would be
Procedurally,
their
what do we do?
choice.
Only the owner can do that.
Right, right.
I'm getting ahead of the game here, but
Next item.
has there been a discussion in this process then about whether someone decides to do this? They don't have a home that's landmarked now. Would they get it landmarked first? Well, then they don't even, we're talking about them not even coming to us unless they need an additional
Yeah.
variation, okay.
I know you have some customers sitting in the,
Well, people are interested in what's gonna happen here, because, you know, it's.
And that's why you're here. Pure and simple, it's dollars and cents and.
Well, I'm also a preservationist too.
No, I'm just
I wanna keep
kidding.
people home,
I'm just kidding.
and I want to be able to inform people in a proper and constructive way too, so.
he was in the room, as they say.
Room where it happens.
No, my thought is that's probably a reasonable compromise, at least at this point in time, and if it helps the HPC and that's a benefit, helps the village, and if we have to revisit it at some point, I think we revisit it.
Great. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Drew.
Thanks, Drew.
Agenda item number 5, staff report?
Not too much in terms of a staff report, I guess. Glenn is no longer with the village, so in the interim,
Thanks, Rob.
I'm filling in today. I think in March it is Mike Croak who will be up here at the dais with you.
Or Eric.
so-
We'll see.
Or Eric. So someone, so it'll be, could be someone different, could be me, so.
As far as the
Until,
agenda goes, anything on the agenda for April?
So, number 1 tonight, that'll be back, I assume.
yes,
That's an easy.
that will be back. Additionally, we do have an application for a variation that should be on your agenda.
For our
in March.
landmark structure.
Oh, 10% or less?
It might be within 10%.
Oh, the plot.
I'd have to
That
look
would
at
be-
that. I'd have to look at that
would be an
again.
Excellent one.
Because
to
it
have.
would be a floor
Let's look at
area
that first
variation,
before we do
in
the
addition to
formal
possibly
recommendations.
impervious surface as well.
You might have to come back for that one, Eric.
That's right.
This was too easy for you. All right.
Update on Stonebridge?
I would say demolition is imminent. They are of the manor house and the gatehouse, not the model homes or the attached units that were started. But they're out there this week and finishing up the asbestos abatement and they've installed silt fencing and the logs that capture runoff water around all the inlet, stormwater inlets, because they're going to be spraying to control dust as part of the demolition. They are planning for bringing in a large crane. They're going to attempt to take off the copper roofing elements, architectural elements, and save those as part of the process. They have a few more days to wait. They have to meet the state requirements in terms of notice of demolition when there's asbestos and other lead paint and so forth. So they're doing all those steps. And again, I think the abatement's going to continue into next week. And that they're doing beyond what the laws require. They're doing some best practices. We met with them. You know, the gatehouse is so far north and there's some residential units close. They're going to hang a dust curtain across the north side. And the neighborhood's very pleased with that. We've been communicating with the Stonebridge Watch Group pretty thoroughly. There has been no new any conversations at all regarding subdivision plans. The property was marketed pursuant to the settlement agreement from the litigation, and most of the feedback we heard from the development community was, there's just not a lot of money flowing to developments like this at this present time in the market conditions. So tough timing, but we'll see. I mean, for all the same reasons that Block 3 is a fantastic property on the North Shore, so is this, right? Someday it will happen, so.
Update on the lake project, the North Shore Water Reclamation District?
I think the village hired a third-party structural engineer to review the North Shore Water Reclamation District's structural documents as relates to installing that 1 million-gallon overflow basin at the lakefront. We just got the feedback today from their response from our review, and they're going to adjust some plans, but they have not been issued a local permit yet, but they have everything else ready to go. If you've been down to the lakefront with such lovely weather, why not? But there's very large portable generators down there. They're going to have backup power set up actually on the hillside behind all the appurtenances of the pumping facility there. When they start construction, they're just trying to make sure they can get their connections and they're confident that they're going to work. So there's some activity down there related to that. We had a meeting probably a month ago now. George was there wearing his Park District hat. The contractor, even though they had originally talked about starting in the fall, the end of, they still don't have any weekend work planned, and most of their work is 7 to 3. So, I mean, they're confident they can still hit the finish line, which is Memorial Day of 2024. So.
Are they gonna use Blodgett for their trucks?
They sometimes, yes. So we're gonna move them around a little bit.
Thank you.
Yeah, so. They'll be on Scranton some, they may come down Center away,
Get a new street out of it after wrecking it.
If you live on the hill then yes, but I don't think you do. So they'll be rebuilding the road down to the lakefront for sure.
And any inquiries on accessory structures, granny flat type? I forget. What you call them.
ADUs?
ADUs, thank you.
Not to my knowledge.
Okay. I'm just curious, after we spent time creating it,
Right.
whether there's a demand
Right.
coming along.
There was conversation at one point about that happening on the eastern 2 lots of Block 3.
Right.
And now there's conversation about a 3-unit attached residential project there,
Yeah, we saw that.
Right,
but
It's just conversation.
still just conversation,
okay.
coffee talk. So
Is that zoned for that? Do you know?
it is not.
Okay, so it'll be coming here.
Those are R4 lots. The default in the village is detached single family. That's the answer.
But the height would be okay, I suppose.
I think that particular builder talked to the neighborhood, and the neighborhood is, tell us when he's coming to the zoning board, we want to support him.
Oh,
So they're ready to erect a bronze statue of him if it happens, so just waiting for that to happen, so. Which means it probably won't, that's the way it works.
And I'm sorry, one more question. Usually Glenn's so used to the series of questions that he just rattles them off. The Blair project that was approved about, in Crabtree about a year ago. A young couple had
Oh, yes,
variation to build a
yes, to
home
put in a barn.
in a barn
Yeah.
with the home.
They have checked in recently with doing some significant armament along the lakefront and working with an engineering firm to do work there, and it seems to me like that's going to be happening this year. And we're talking about siting a home, but glacial.
When you say armament, you'd be the big stones.
And maybe even a breakwater out on the lake.
What if you have to go Army Corps of
That's big.
Engineers probably? for
Yes.
that
And I'm happy to take questions. This is fun. Maybe I'll sit there, Eric.
All right, Commissioners' report, agenda item number 6.
one. I told you I won't be here next month, so.
No.
All right, agenda item number 7, adjournment. Is there a motion?
Make a motion.
Second.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Drew.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Have a good trip.
Thanks, Eric.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Eric. Hope you enjoyed it.